All right, brovs, we're back with the six black presidents, Black Blood, White Mask, U.S.A. by Dr. Auset, BaKhufu, and we continue with the psychobiography of Thomas Jefferson. Give Jacob and other Africans. Give me liberty or give me deaths. Patrick Henry had a son by one of his favorite African women. The couple named their son Melancton. Melancton? An athlete with melatonin? He probably was. He was said to be very intelligent, melanin, and taken good care of by his father. Information such as this is documented in this book to show and update once again that to have presidents with black blood running through their veins is not so astounding. Benjamin Electricity Franklin, also one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, is well known for his liaisons with older women and with beautiful African women. It is not felt that the appropriate word to use for Ben's sexual encounters with the African women can be called affairs. History shows that many women during the slave era were actually raped, sometimes brutally, although many may not have fought the rapists off. Their submissiveness was due to their enslavement. Hold on. Their submissiveness was due to their enslavement as political prisoners and could be considered a survival tactic. But lest we forget, it must again be pointed out that many proud African women and men did fight for their rights and dignity in these slave sheds. Many died, but some lived through it. So-called masters with broken necks were found in many instances in slave history. One piece of interesting "our" story was found in judicial cases concerning American slavery and the Negro, Tennessee, 1842. Jacob, an enslaved person, was indicted for the murder of his master, Robert Bradford. The slaves were supposed to be working, but Jacob was playing around, not working very hard. Bradford threatened to whip Jacob. Jacob told Bradford that he was so tired of him as he was of him, that he was as tired of him as he was of him. Bradford attempted to whip Jacob. Jacob took the whip from Bradford, broke it into pieces, and ran. In a day or so, Jacob returned. Bradford ordered Jacob to get a rope. Bradford broke it into pieces, and Bradford ordered Jacob to get a rope. Bradford told Jacob that he would be tied and whipped. Jacob refused. Jacob left after being given food and clothing from Bradford because Bradford said that he did not want Jacob stealing from the neighbors. Bradford then went and got his brother Frederick. They planned to whip Jacob when Jacob returned the next day. Of course, Jacob wasn't one to carry weapons, but he had prepared a large butcher knife he hid in his clothing. The next day, when the two brothers proceeded to beat Jacob with a stick given to them by a slave, the two white men seized Jacob by the collar. Frederick gave Jacob 2 hard blows to the head. Jacob told the brothers that they would have to kill him because he was fighting back. The two whites jumped on Jacob's back. He threw both off with little effort. He took out his knife and stabbed Robert to death. Once again he ran because the law cannot recognize the violence of the master as a legitimate cause of provocation from a so-called slave. Thomas Jefferson stated that slavery was barbarous, cruel, and shameful. In the late 1770s, Jefferson came up with a plan for the eventual resettlement to Africa of all children born to slaves. They could be replaced, he said, by free white colonists from Europe. The scheme was quickly rejected by Jefferson's fellow planters. Jefferson proposed that young slaves be educated. He proposed that when the men became 21 and the women became 18, that they be given tools, cows, seeds, and guns. He said that they should be set free but taken back to Africa. Was this because he didn't want them around, or was it because he felt that a people should be in their own cultural environment? Jefferson is not the only president who wanted blacks sent back to Africa. Abraham Lincoln, one of the 6 black presidents, made the same proposal almost 100 years later. See Chapter 3. But with an afterthought, Jefferson stated that if the slaves were given their freedom, they would still harbor much anger and would eventually turn on white people. Abraham Lincoln made a similar statement. With all Jefferson's talk and plans, he would later have 200 slaves of his own that he inherited from his and his wife's parents. He's known to be a so-called good master, but was criticized for not freeing his slaves. Naturally, Jefferson was criticized by many blacks during this time for not making a positive effort toward freedom for Africans in America. Runaway from the subscriber in Albemarle, the advertisement stated in a Virginia newspaper, a mulatto, part white slave called Sandy, the advertiser who offered a reward for the return of the artful and knowish Sandy was none other than Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson had affairs with many African slave-held, politically imprisoned women. These affairs took place before and after the death of his wife. She begged him to stop his carousing, but to no avail. Jefferson is also known to have had affairs with 2 white women who were married. One of these women's husbands was a friend of Jefferson's. The other husband was an acquaintance of Jefferson's and bisexual. Jefferson is said to have been a very private man. He kept 18,000 letters that he wrote and filed 25,000 that he received. He destroyed all correspondence that he may have had with his wife, Martha, and his mother. Research, analytical assessments, and psychohistorical theory tends towards the notion that Jefferson was more than likely aware of his father's background, perhaps never really asked anyone about it. Little is known about Jefferson's marital life except that he supposedly adored and loved his wife very much. It is speculated that his intimacies with other women were separate from his love for his wife. It is here theorized that if he could separate himself and make himself white and black, then it is also possible that he could also mentally separate and make himself married and single. Jefferson's wife, Martha, died September 6, 1782, 10 years after their marriage. Muckrackers and Mudslingers. From Shelley Ross's book, Fall from Grace, 1988, she states that the media press was pretty lenient on Jefferson until 1802 when an old acquaintance and ally of Jefferson's against Alexander Hamilton became disloyal and eventually turned on Jefferson. This man's name was James Callender, an alcoholic muckracker, isn't it muckraker, who was very accurate in his published slandering of public figures. This man fled from Scotland to America in 1793 on sedition charges, which derived from his vicious but true attacks against the British government. There is much documented proof that many criminals from Europe were shipped to America. Callender criticized John Adams when he was the President of the United States, calling Adams weak, ignorant, ferocious, and deceitful. Thomas Jefferson, then the Vice President, and then Adams' opponent, gave Callender high marks for such negative publicity and told Callender that such papers cannot fail to produce the best efforts. However, Callender was still arrested for violation of the 1798 Sedition Act, and Jefferson defended Callender, providing a strong defense for freedom of speech. They lost. An anti-Jefferson judge found Callender guilty. Later, when Mr. Jefferson became President of the United States, he fired this judge and granted Callender his freedom. This is more than he did for his own mulatto children. Jefferson could not see it fit or appropriate for a white man to legally free his own children until after he was dead. Some of Jefferson's children ran for their freedom. Within his eyesight, he sometimes smiled and said nothing and did nothing. Many of the Jefferson children ran and eventually failed for white. Jefferson's trouble started when Callender wanted the job in the White House. When he was refused the job, he decided to take revenge. Sex scandals became Callender's specialty, and he was good at his work. He uncovered an affair that Jefferson started in 1768 with a married woman by the name of Betsy Walker. Betsy was the wife of one of Jefferson's closest friends, John Walker. Jefferson was an usher at their wedding. This seduction went on for years. John Walker got word of the affair. He later wrote to a friend and enemy of Jefferson stating that at a neighbor's overnight gathering, when the women retired for bed, Jefferson pretended to be ill and went to bed also. But Jefferson did not go to his own bed. He went to Betsy's bed with me, John Walker, in the house in close proximity. Jefferson's white women. According to CNN news reporter Andrea Reynolds, when she interviewed Saddam Hussein, she asked him if he had a mistress and an illegitimate child. He answered her indirectly that compared to some of your U.S. presidents, I'm a very virtuous man. Thomas Jefferson's virtue was brutally attacked in the New York Evening Post, the Betsy Walker affair. On April 5th, 1805, Jefferson was called an outcast of America. He admitted his guilt to friends that he had an affair with a white woman named Betsy Walker during the summer of 1769. History shows that these old Americans did not necessarily consider Jefferson an outcast because of an affair. Many of them were doing the same thing, but probably more because the publicity surrounding his ancestral background and later his love affair with Sally Hemings. These people did not label George Washington an outcast. He seduced his next-door neighbor's wife and had affairs with several of his female political prisoners. Slaves. They did not call Benjamin Why is she calling him Electricity Franklin? They did not call Benjamin Electricity Franklin an outcast who seduced several older women and had affairs with many beautiful African slave women. And even in these old conservative days, none of these men were subjected to a government, Congress, Senate hearing. They should have been, because these African women were sexually harassed. Well, times change, and certain people have to be used as examples. A few years before Jefferson became minister to France, thousands of Africans were in the Revolutionary War. Most of these Africans were escaped slaves, ex-political prisoners, whom the British had promised their freedom after this war. In 1783, many of these Africans were shipped to Nova Scotia. They settled the Black Town. Many slaves, there's the chooch, in New York City took advantage of this cruise opportunity and boarded ship in order to get away from the brutality of America. Many of these same Africans later settled in Sierra Leone, West Africa. Before Jefferson became president while serving as minister to France, he had another affair with another married white woman. Her name was Maria Cosway. She was 27 years old with blonde hair, blue eyes, and an Italian accent. Thomas Jefferson is said to have fallen in love with her as soon as he laid his eyes on her. Maria was talented, and Jefferson loved her all the more for this. She was introduced in class society by none other than the sexy Angelica Church, the sister-in-law and lover of Alexander Hamilton. For Jefferson, at age 43, and thinking that all his emotional feelings were buried with his wife, discovered that he had very strong emotions for this young woman. Jefferson disregarded the presence of her bisexual husband, Richard Thomas, and Maria shared many beautiful moments and afternoons together. Even Richard began to encourage the relationship. Whenever Jefferson visited the couple in their home, Richard would always leave Maria and Jefferson alone. These occasions were probably good times for Richard's own liaisons. At the time, neither Jefferson nor Maria were aware of Richard's bisexuality. In September 1786, it was time for the Cosways to return to London. Jefferson expressed that he felt more dead than alive. He wrote 12 pages of love to Maria called My Head and My Heart. This poem can be found in Helen D. Bullock's book, My Head and My Heart, and other more up-to-date literature on Jefferson. In August 1787, Maria returned to Paris, France. She returned to visit Jefferson for a 4-month period, and her husband was not with her. Things had changed. On December 8th, when she left Paris to return to London, she stood Jefferson up for their farewell breakfast. They never saw each other again, but they did continue to write each other for the rest of their lives. John Calendar, the muckraker, claimed that the reason the romance took a downfall was because Jefferson had begun that same summer to have an affair with the young 17-year-old mulatto, black American female Sally Hemings. Hemings was the mother of 6 of Jefferson's mulatto children. Sally went along on this trip to help Jefferson care for his daughter by Martha. As mentioned, Sally Hemings was the half-sister of Jefferson's wife, Martha Wales Jefferson. Martha's father had taken an African woman named Betty, as his mistress after the death of his third wife. They had 6 children. Sally was one of these children, and she was willed to Martha after her father's death. At no time during his lifetime did Thomas Jefferson divulge any useful information on the Sally Hemings subject, nor his ancestry. In 1808, at the ripe age of 65, before leaving his presidential post, Jefferson did have a brief bed affair, while Sally Hemings dutifully cared for their newborn baby, Eston. This affair was the 4th president of the United States' wife. James Madison was a good friend of Jefferson's, perhaps too good. Madison admired and respected Jefferson. Madison was a sickly man who stood a short 5'4.5" and weighed only 99 pounds. He was shy and insecure, especially when it came to love and women. He did, however, luck up and marry a beautiful, sexy woman named Dolly. Madison, named Dolly. Madison adored his wife and perhaps wanted to satisfy her no matter what it took. Knowing of Jefferson's sexual prowess, James Madison offered Jefferson his wife in return for political favors. Somehow I don't believe this, but Jefferson, being the dutiful gentleman, took Madison up on his offer and had a mutual seduction session or more with Madison's very well-endowed 39-year-old wife. She was the same age as Sally Hemings, so old Jefferson was probably just looking for a little white action, here connecting with his other self. Declaration of Demise. 26 years after Thomas Jefferson's death, Frederick Douglass said in a 4th of July speech for Africans, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty and unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which could disgrace a nation of savages." Speech at Rochester, New York, July 5th, 1852. Thomas Jefferson died on Independence Day, July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after his writing of the Declaration of Independence, a declaration of false claims written by a slaveholder. With everything about Jefferson's life said and done, his mulatto father, Peter Jefferson, would still be proud of his son. Thomas did do many interesting things during his lifetime, and he aspired to satisfy his father. Another black man. She is pretty hot. There it is. That mutant photo of Alexander Hamilton. I mean, it looks like someone photoshopped the hair off the man, but that's just my opinion. Monticello, Sally Hemings, and Jefferson's home. Ancient America. African head found in San Lorenzo before Columbus. And that's all for this chapter. We shall move on to Andrew Jackson next. Goodbye. Goodbye.